Good morning and welcome to Mochilazo. My name is Luis.
And I am Gabby.
And I know you were asking for more content in English, so we will make the second part of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail in English for you.
We are right now at Beam Distillery in Kentucky, and we are going to take a tour with them. So join us, and we hope you like it.
This distillery is kind of an hour 20 from Lexington and around an hour from Louisville. So just plan ahead your tour with the time and use your reservation as well.
They have a tour where you can bottle your own bottle, and you can take it home, and you can they have the option of engraving it if you wish. So we are looking forward to that. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, this is one of the best tours that they can offer here. Let's go.
So the first thing that we need to talk about is our water. Water is very important to bourbon making. Kentucky sits on a natural limestone shelf. You remember I said that Jen started a limestone quarry up here at Clermont? And that was in part so that he would have a good source of limestone water. You may hear them refer to something called a mash bill. Now that mash bill just refers to the grains that make up the ingredients for the bourbon. In our traditional mash bill that's used for Jim Beam and knobcreek, the first is corn. So corn will give bourbon a sweet flavor. It also provides a lot of starch, which helps with our fermentation process with our yeast. It's what we call a flavor grain. And for us, that is our rye. So rye lends some spice notes to bourbon, as well as some fruit notes. If any of you are familiar with our Basil Hayden, that's called a high rye mash bill, a high rye bourbon. So there's more rye in that mash bill than there would be for a Jim Beam. So you'll get more of that fruit and that spice flavor. And the third grain that we use in our traditional mash bill is malted barley. So this one doesn't have much flavor to it, but it does contain enzymes that will help with our fermentation process. So that's why we use this one. In 1964, Congress passed a law that declared bourbon America's native spirit. And when they did that, they set forth some rules called the standards of identity that we have to follow in order to call our product a bourbon. So the first of those is that bourbon must be made in the United States. It's America's native spirit, so it has to be made here. It does not have to be made in Kentucky, but we do it the best. 95% of the world's bourbon is made right here in Kentucky. And James B. Beam produces about half of that every year. The next rule, bourbon must be aged in new charred oak containers. Notice I didn't say barrels. You don't have to use barrels, but most distilleries, including us, do. That's because barrels are very easy to move around because they roll. Our next rule talks about our grains. That mash bill for bourbon must be at least 51% corn. Which means that bourbon is mostly corn. The rest of that 49%, you can change what grains you use and change what proportions you use them in. Just like our Basil Hayden has more rye than our Jim Beam. Next rule talks about fruits. And proof just refers to the amount of alcohol in the liquid. So when you distill bourbon, it can't come off the still any higher than 160 proof. This is to help protect the flavor. The higher you distill something, the less flavor it's going to have coming off the still. Bourbon can't go into a barrel any higher than 125 proof. And bourbon can't go into a bottle any lower than 80 proof. And then our last rule, nothing can be added to bourbon except for water.
Behind me here is what we call the big house, and that's where our 65-foot column still lives. Now we do call this the hardest working still in America. This one still can make every single product that James B. Beam makes. So we can do Jim Beam, Knobcreek, Basil, Hayden, Booker's, Baker's, anything we make can be done on this one still. And because of the way that it's built, and the way that it's been adjusted throughout the years, since 1967 when it was first put in, there's minimal downtime in between making each of those products. So this still just about runs 24/7 throughout the year. And it's only shut down for a few days for cleaning. So right now they're making Jim Beam here. Later on today, they'll be switching over to knobcreek raw. And because it takes minimal downtime, we're able to do multiple products during the day. So we'll talk a little bit about how this still works. So our distiller's beer is going to come from fermentation. And it's going to go to that silver beer well that you see at the bottom of the building here. From there, it'll be pumped to the top of the still. Just under where you see that top row of windows is our 17th tray. That still is lined with trays on the inside that have holes in them. That's to slow down that distiller's beer going down the still. That's because we're injecting steam from the bottom to heat that distiller's beer up. Alcohol and water have different evaporation points. Alcohol's is lower. So we're going to heat that distiller's beer up enough to evaporate the alcohol and leave that water a liquid. So the water and the grains are going to fall to the bottom. The alcohol as a vapor is going to rise to the top and exit the still. From there, it'll be condensed back down into a liquid. That's what we call low wine. Now, low wine still has some impurities in it, so we don't want you drinking it. So we're going to distill it again. There is what's called a doubler in the basement of this building. It's basically another still. That low wine will be distilled, we'll condense that alcohol vapor down into a liquid again, and that's what's called high wine. Some of you may have heard it called white dog. That's what's going to go into our barrels to become bourbon. Now normally we'd be able to go in and take a look at the still. It's very loud, and it's a little hard to see the still. But today there's a lot of ice on that ramp, so I don't want to take you guys down. I don't want anybody to slip and fall. Our bus driver had a bit of a fall this morning. Don't want to do that to you guys. The next step is to put it into barrels for aging. Now we don't make our own barrels here. We partner with the Independent Stave Company. They're based out of Lebanon, Missouri and Lebanon, Kentucky. So making a barrel starts with cutting down a tree, also called felling. So the trees that are used average about 100 years old, and they mostly come from the Ozarks. And once we have those trees cut, ISC's log buyer is going to inspect each one and determine which ones are best for making bourbon barrels. Now, since we are using old trees, regeneration is very important both to us and to ISC. So they mindfully manage those forests, clearing out any dead trees, anything that is sick, making sure that those forests are very healthy. The next step is sawing those logs down. They're going to be cut into bolts, and then quarter bolts, and then rough staves. And those staves are then going to be set outside to season. Like this breaks down tannins in the wood. Those tannins would give bourbon a bitter taste. The staves are then going to be fitted together, nice and tight, just like a puzzle. This is what keeps those barrels watertight. There are no glue, screws, nails, anything like that. Then we'll char the insides of those barrels by setting them on fire. We use a level 4 char, meaning that it is lit on fire for 55 seconds. This charring caramelizes sugars in the wood and brings them to the surface. We'll then put on the heads and the tails of the barrel, drill a bung hole so that we can fill and empty the barrel. We will fill them with high wine, and then they will be hand rolled into one of our warehouses to age for at least 4 years. Once that bourbon is finished, that barrel will be hand rolled back out of the warehouse. And that shows you how we get the bourbon out. We'll be doing that here in just a bit.
Do you have different labels with a different char inside?
There are a couple that we use a slightly different char. Most of our standard products, Jim Beam, knobcreek, Basil, Hayden, are all going to use that level 4 char. We may do some different finishings in different barrels. For example, our Basil Hayden toast is finished in a toasted barrel. So that one is barely kissed by flame, gives it a different flavor. And ending with the end of distillation right before we fill the barrel. What's really interesting about this portion is this graphic we've got right here that shows you a little bit more about how the still works. So after fermentation, that distiller's beer is going to come to the still. This is that silver beer well you saw outside of the big house. These guys right here are beer heaters. You couldn't see those. That's for efficiency. We're going to preheat that beer so that our still doesn't take as long or as much energy to evaporate that alcohol. Once that beer is preheated, it'll go in at the 17th tray up here. And you can see these trays and how they slow down that descent of that water and those grains. Water and grains come out of the still at the bottom. We'll dry those out and send them off to local farmers for livestock feed. We don't like to waste anything here. The alcohol vapors are going to rise to the top and exit the top of the still. So that's our low wine vapor. We're going to condense that down into the liquid low wine. Like I said, there's still some impurities in that. So it'll go to the doubler for that second distillation, and we'll condense that down into the high wine. And that's what's going to go into the barrels. Now, a little bit about proofs. We talked about distillation proof can't be any higher than 160. Today they're doing Jim Beam. We distill Jim Beam at 135 proof. So it's much lower than what that cap is. So when you taste Jim Beam, you'll still get some of that grain flavor in that liquid. Now, does anybody remember what proof can go into a barrel?
125.
125. So we've got to bring that proof down in order to get our Jim Beam into a barrel. So that is actually the step in between distillation and barreling. And that is proofing. So that's kind of what we got set up back here. So on either side here, we have scaled down versions of our proofing tanks. So our high line at 135 is going to come to these tanks. And does anybody know what we're going to add to bring that proof down? Water. It's the only thing we can add. If you remember those standards of identity from Beam Made bourbon. So we will add enough water to that high wine to bring it down to 125 proof. And if you guys look over here at our nice little barrels, it'll tell you exactly what proof our different products go into the barrel. So we've got just different distillation proofs for every product that we do. That affects the flavor. Because if you distill something higher, there's less of that grain flavor. It's one of the ways that we can get different flavors for our bourbons. Then Jim Beam and knobcreek both go into the barrel at 125. That means we're adding different amounts of water to each of those products before they go into the barrel. If you remember, alcohol and water react with that barrel differently during aging. So that's going to affect the flavor too. Those numbers there tell you the youngest barrel in that batch. So Jim Beam is 4 years old. It's had 4 years to go through the different seasons inside that barrel, expanding in the summertime into the wood, contracting in the wintertime, bringing all of those caramelized wood sugars back into the bourbon with it. knobcreek has been aged for 9 years. So it's had 5 more years to pull out more of that flavor from the barrel and more of that color from that charred layer. That's one of the other ways that we can affect flavor of our bourbons. So even though Jim Beam and knobcreek use that same mash bill, they're going to taste very different from each other. You can see the numbers for Basil Hayden as well. Because of the way we want Basil Hayden to taste, that flavor profile, it's going to be distilled at 120 proof, go into a barrel at 115. We're lowering that proofage to go into the barrel, saving some of that rye flavor with that high rye mash bill. Your bottling proof will also affect the flavor some. So Jim Beam bottled at 80 proof, knobcreek the small batch bottled at 100 proof.
Question,
Yeah.
you have kind of the bakers, the brewers?
Yes.
Are
Yes.
they same mash bill than the others, or they are?
So Baker's uses the same mash bill. The distillation proof is going to be different. The age is going to be different. It's aged for 7 years. Bottling proof is going to be at 107 proof. And the other thing with Baker's is where it's located in the warehouse for aging. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So our warehouses where those barrels age are not climate controlled. That means there's going to be temperature variations throughout the year and from year to year. And there's going to be variations between the bottom floors and the top floors. So the top floors of our warehouse are going to be hotter than our bottom floors. Even during the summer, the first floor of the warehouse will only hit about 85 degrees. The top floor can get to over 130. That changes how much of those wood flavors and those wood sugars the bourbon pulls out of the barrel. It also affects how much of that bourbon evaporates over time. So because of these differences, and because we don't rotate our barrels throughout the warehouse, in order to get consistency with Jim Beam, we're going to take a cross-section of barrels. So some from the top, the middle, the bottom, and from the outside to the inside of the warehouse. By doing this, we can make sure that a bottle of Jim Beam that you buy here is the same as one that you buy at home, is the same as one that you buy over in Europe. They're all going to taste the same. The next batch size that we have is small batch. What do you guys think the difference is there? It's fewer barrels. So large batch has more barrels than a small batch. Our small batch bourbons use a couple hundred. There's a big difference. So in order to get a consistent flavor profile, there's going to be some changes because there's fewer barrels. But to get that profile about right, we're going to pull those barrels from the middle of the warehouse. That's where Booker, who created the small batch, likes his bourbon. So that's where we still pull it. That's going to be like our Basil Hayden. And then our next batch size down is the smallest of the small batch. It's a single barrel. That's what I've got right behind me here. This is a knobcreek single barrel. So somebody has the very unlucky job of going through the warehouse and tasting samples from every barrel of Knob Creek. And they're going to decide which barrels are good enough to stand on their own. They don't need to be mixed with any other barrels to get a good flavor out of them. So that's what I've got right behind me here. I'm going to proof this to 120, and then we're going to bottle it as is. Not mixing it with anything else. That means that every barrel of Knob Creek, depending on where it was located and what kind of weather we had during the 9 years it was aging, is going to taste very different. So if you like a bottle of single barrel, you want to try to find a bottle from that same barrel when you go to buy another. Because otherwise, it could taste very, very different than what you're looking for. All right, I need a couple of volunteers. One more. We have bourbon come out. That's exactly how we empty them in the larger production plant. And I'm going to catch that bourbon in this glass right here. You ready? All right. All right, so as you can see, they spilled some. It happened.
Cry?
But like I said earlier, we don't like to waste anything here. All of that bourbon goes through this fine mesh screen. And that is going to screen out any bits of the alligator char that have flaked off into the bourbon while it ages. If you look real close, you can see some of it in the bottom of this glass here. You don't want to put that in a bottle for you guys to drink. So we're just going to... And then it's going to go to our bottling line. And that's our next stop. You'll get plenty to taste. Alright y'all, welcome to our bottling line. This is called T-Line. And this is where we do Knob Creek single barrel. So it is an actual production line. These guys are actual employees.
Morning. Morning. Morning.
And here is where you get the chance to take home a really cool souvenir. So here you get the chance to bottle your own Knob Creek single barrel. Now there is an additional cost to this. It's just the cost of the bottle. So it's $59.99, same as if you pulled a bottle off the shelf in the gift shop. But with this one, you do get to participate in the bottling process. And at the end, you'll get the chance to put your thumbprint in the top of the wax on top of the bottle there. We could also do engraving over at the gift shop if you wanted to further personalize it for a gift or just a really cool souvenir. When you go in, you want to walk on this metal plate that we've got here. You'd probably be able to smell bourbon. That's because even though these barrels are watertight, they are not airtight. So some of our bourbon is going to evaporate out of the barrels. This is called the angel share. So while the barrels are aging, we are going to lose about 10% of our liquid in the first year. Every year after the first, we'll lose about another 4% per year. So in the summertime, when it gets warm, the bourbon is going to expand in that barrel, soak into the wood. It's going to pass through that charred layer. While it's doing that, it's going to pick up all of those caramelized wood sugars from that char. When it gets cold like this, that bourbon will contract back into the barrel, pulling all of those charred wood flavors and those wood sugars in with it. So Jim Beam will do that for 4 years. Knob Creek will do that for 9. That's where you get some of that different flavor and some of the different color. Because the color of your bourbon comes from that charred layer, with that bourbon passing in and out of it. Bourbon has soaked into the wood while it ages. So some of that bourbon is going to be left in the wood. That's where we get our devil's cut. With devil's cut, we're going to extract the bourbon out of that wood. We'll also talk a little bit about Legent. Legent is one of our more innovative products, a newer product. It was developed by our master distiller Fred and the chief blender at Suntory in Japan, Shinji Fukuyo. So Legent, we take Fred's bourbon, we will finish some of it in a sherry cask. That's going to pull out some dried fruit flavors like fig. We'll take some of that bourbon and finish it in a red wine barrel. That's going to pull out some more tartness from that wine and some more of those brighter fruit flavors that you get with those grapes. Shinji is then going to take those two liquids and he's going to blend them with even more of Fred's Kentucky Straight bourbon. With his blending, he's going to unlock a lot of different complex flavors. And he's going to meet a flavor profile that he and Fred came up with. So Legent is going to start off nice and bold like a bourbon, and it's going to finish nice, bright, and fruity like a Japanese whiskey. It's a collaboration of East and West, Kentucky and Japan, Fred and Shinji. There's nothing else quite like it on the market right now, and you guys will have the option of choosing that as your 4th taste when we go up to our tasting here in a bit. Alright, so we'll go into the tasting. I'm going to show you guys how to taste the way that Fred taught me. And then once we've done that, you guys can decide if that's the way you want to drink your bourbon or not. First thing you want to do is take a look at it. You're going to mostly look at the color. It's the easiest thing to see. So we'll start with your Jim Beam there on your left and take a look at the color of it. Compare it to, say, the Knob Creek that you've got on your tasting board there too. And let me know if you notice anything. It's lighter. So we talked about that already. The Knob Creek ages longer than the Jim Beam. Jim Beam is a 4-year-old. Knob Creek is 9 years old. Next thing you do when tasting bourbon is you're going to smell it. But don't stick your nose down in the glass. You won't be able to smell anything the rest of the day. My suggestion is part your lips a little, take the glass under your nose and inhale. That'll let you get all of the different smells from the bourbon without having your nose overwhelmed by alcohol vapor. And what do you all smell on that Jim Beam?
Caramel.
Caramel? Jim Beam? Number one answer I get when I ask that question is bourbon. So the caramel And if anybody smells vanilla, that's going to come from the barrel, all those wood sugars. Does anybody smell banana? That's from the yeast. Remember, we've used that same yeast strain since 1935? When that proof is a little bit lower like it is, you still get those grain smells in that Jim Beam. All right, so next step is tasting, and there's a certain way to do this if you're going to follow Fred's method. So first, you're going to take a very small sip of bourbon. This is going to wake your palate up. Get it ready to taste through the alcohol. This is especially important if it's your first drink of the day. There's no judgment if it's not. Your second sip is going to be your tasting sip. It's going to be a little bit of a larger sip. This one you're going to roll all around your mouth. Get your tongue, your cheeks, roof of your mouth. You have taste receptors in all those different places, so you want to make sure you hit all of them. And you're going to want to exhale. Get rid of that excess alcohol vapors so you can really taste your bourbon. Our next taste is going to be Basil Hayden. So Basil Hayden is this bottle right here. And just like Jim Beam, it is bottled at 80 proof. So this is the one that has that higher rye mash bill. Now Basil Hayden is what we call an approachable bourbon. It's going to be knobcreek. Now this is the small batch knobcreek at that 100 proof. This is the one that if I were going to add some water to my bourbon, this would be the one I would do it with. That higher proof and that 9-year age can hold up to a little bit of water. It also makes it very good for bourbon forward cocktails like the old fashioned. Since this one has been aged longer, you may get some more of that vanilla and that caramel. Now this one uses that same mash bill as Jim Beam, so you can really taste the differences in those distillation and barrelling proofs, as well as where it's located in the warehouse on those middle floors, and that older age. Now Booker's is uncut and unfiltered, so we haven't added any water to this at all, so it's cask strength. And unfiltered, we haven't taken out any of those wood oils or any of those lipids from that wood. Makes it very smooth, even with that high proof. Your next choice is Baker's. So Baker Beam was Booker's cousin, and he lived in that White House right there because he was head distiller here at Clermont.
Jim Beam offers a pretty cool tour. At the very end you can engrave your bottle as well, after you bottle obviously. So this is a really customized tour, and this is something unique that you can find in the Kentucky Bourbon Trail.
It is super cold outside, so we decided to say goodbye from inside the car. We hope you have enjoyed this tour and our first video in English. I don't know.
Give us a like if you like the video,
and subscribe
to the channel.
Share, tag and share.
We will go to the next distillery. This is a big one as well. It's Luke's Row. He's in Barstown. He's just 22 minutes from here. So let's go to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail.
And we really enjoyed our experience here at Jim Beam, so thank you so much. It was great. See you in the next one. Bye.
Viajeros, como siempre, muchas gracias por ver este video. Si no se han suscrito, suscríbanse al canal, den un like si les ha gustado y compartan con los viajeros a quienes pueda servir esta información.